Well, hello there, and welcome to another Free West Media video. And before we go ahead, just remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. And again, it's my privilege to be talking to Brandi from Texas. How are
Hi,
you,
Dan.
Brandi?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure. I'm doing fine. I haven't got the virus yet, and everything's fine. Yes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Black Lives Matter because there have been quite a few developments since we last spoke about it. And you've also done a recent video
Yeah,
on your channel, Conservative Texas Women, about Black Lives Matter. And here in South Africa, we've had some new developments in the sense that some of our cricket players, they are also taking the knee for Black Lives Matter, whereas Black Lives Matter, there's never been a chapter of Black Lives Matter in South Africa, and this seems
right,
really just so bizarre. But there was a huge outcry from the public, but a lot of people here, I don't think they understand quite what Black Lives Matter is all about. What would you say
right.
is their objective?
I think that it's just another excuse, which any excuse to promote hate propaganda against, number one, the white minority community in South Africa. Um, I mean, please explain to me how 7% of the population is abusing you, terrorizing you still when you control. I mean, the government is controlled by the Black majority. Everything is controlled by the Black majority. So please explain to me how these people are oppressing you 26 years after you took over the country. I mean, it's just another excuse to attack and demonize um, conservatives, because it's not only white people who are attacked in this. Even Black conservatives are supremacists. You know, if they speak anything against these people, Unathi
Yes, exactly.
is
You know, I've been
someone in
talking
South
to her
Africa,
recently, and a lot of people, yes, say that she's just,
a great lady. I've spoken to her also privately. She's a very intelligent lady, very articulate, and she has her own mind, and that's very dangerous as a Black person in South Africa. It actually makes me really sad. I will tell you, I was upset with you when you were interviewing her
why is
because
that?
you're very matter of fact. It's just how you are and how you speak. And as a woman, I saw her get upset when she spoke about attacks that she comes under and how people had told her, or they tell her, if this was the old ANC, you would be necklaced. And she started crying. She
Oh,
got
yes, I
very
remember that.
emotional.
Yes, yes.
And so I'm watching, thinking, Dan, say something. I just wanted to give her a hug because
Yes,
it is very
initially
sad.
I wasn't really, I mean, it was a bit unexpected, and only halfway through did I realize what was going on. Initially I
Yeah,
didn't quite, um,
you
I,
didn't
yeah,
realize
I
she got
didn't pick it up
emotional.
quickly enough. That was the problem. Yes.
Yeah,
But
but
now
that just
in
hit
the
me really hard.
US, it's getting more and more extreme, isn't it? I mean, some of the things that these Black Lives Matter people are saying, I mean, they say that they want to overthrow the US government, just like they've done in South Africa, like the ANC more or less took power as a
Yeah, I
revolutionary movement here.
I just made a video about this a couple of days ago. I wrote, a short article on what they're doing, and they're basically doing to the US exactly what the ANC did to South Africa. seeking to cause mass chaos and putting themselves out as the victims when they're actually the perpetrators to overthrow the government. I mean, that's what they're doing. They want the government to act against them with force so that they can seem to be the victims. And they continue
Well,
to do this
if
across the
you
world.
think back, that kind of strategy, it goes right back to the left-wing terrorism of the 1960s and the 1970s. You had the Weathermen in the US, and you had the Red Army faction in Germany and the Red Brigades in Italy. And their whole strategy through their violence was to provoke the state into a kind of a hard, into a hard response, so that they could then show the people that they were living under fascism or something, and then
Right.
the people would be on their side. And it seems to me that, yeah, I mean, that's a classical kind of a minority extremist terrorist method. And now Black Lives Matter is doing exactly that in the US.
Yeah, and it's working effectively. Why? Because money is being pumped into them by corporate America, by George Soros's Open Society Foundation, by many places. I mean, tons of money, so that they can pump out propaganda. So it doesn't matter what the actual numbers and data say, according to the Department of Justice, on who is being victimized. Um, the media tells people the opposite. The media says that white people are committing mass atrocities against blacks, and that's a lie. That is fundamentally untrue and a flat out lie. The numbers, if you go by the Department of Justice numbers, we don't have a white on black crime issue. We don't have a white on white crime issue. We don't have a white on anyone crime issue. Yes, white people commit crimes, but not as an epidemic of just
Mm.
violence
Mm.
and destruction of entire cities and setting police stations on fire. It's despicable. It's really disgraceful, and I'm ashamed that people are allowing this to continue.
But they're even making claims that they want to have the state of Texas as reparations or something. You mentioned that. So how do you think Texans
I
will
read
take to
that.
that?
My thought was good luck, because I'm sorry, but in America, um, the black population is 13% of the population. And only a tiny minority of that even support Black Lives Matter. The majority of law-abiding Black Americans don't support Black Lives Matter, and they want no part of it. They want their communities to be safe. They want their children to be safe. They're tired of the violence, So good luck taking over the state of Texas, because according to the U.S. government, the state of Texas owns more guns and ammo than every other state put together. And I will tell you, as a native Texan, we don't register our weapons. So that's only what they know about. So good luck. We do have places in Texas that are very liberal. The major cities, are places like Austin, which is the Portland of Texas. It's disgusting. But
And
the
Houston, I mean, in
majority,
Houston or Dallas or what?
Houston, Dallas, but those are just cities.
Mm.
The all of the rural areas, they're conservative. They're a lot like the poor. You're not going to come in and take our land or anything without a fight. um, I try to imagine someone coming up to my dad's door and telling him they're going to take his land.
Mm.
It would not happen without a fight, and everybody would end up dead. I mean, I don't we're not just going to walk away from his land. Texans are not like that. So they're not getting the state of Texas. And that's that. They better go try for Portland or somewhere else. They'll probably be successful. Texas, I doubt it.
Now, how do you, well, you're saying that the corporates support the movement by means of money. So there are these parallels with South Africa, of course, where the foreign governments and even some of the corporate people, I mean, they didn't quite give money to the ANC, but they joined in some of the financial boycotts and so on in order to get them into power.
Sweden.
Yeah, and of course the Swedish government,
Sweden
the Social
pumped,
Democratic government of
I
Sweden.
believe, more money than anyone into them.
Yes,
And Nelson Mandela was on the American terror watch list for many years, many years. And I believe that I read one of the first places he visited when he was released from prison was Sweden.
yes,
But
exactly.
yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much the same.
I've even read not so long ago that some of the communists from here, I mean the proper communists who were card-carrying members of the Communist Party and were also imprisoned for sabotage, together with Mandela, somebody like Dennis Goldberg. When he was released from prison, I think it was in the 1980s, he then, he went to Europe and he met some Swedes somewhere, and then they invited him to Sweden, and he stayed there for months at their expense, and he visited all kinds of places, schools, universities, and tried to get
Right.
support for, obviously there was already financial support for the ANC, but he even still collected more money from the public and so on. At some of the schools and places where people gave him a kind of a cold shoulder or they started asking critical questions, he described them as fascists. If you don't agree with him, then you're a fascist. So that sort of mentality you also see now in the US. If you don't agree with these extremist leftist people, the Antifa and Black Lives Matter,
Right.
then
So
you're a fascist or a racist.
the actual people that are going out and destroying businesses, cities, because you don't agree with them, are calling you a fascist. I spoke on a couple of instances of white people. Um, and look, I know this is not a popular subject or topic, and that a lot of people shy away from talking about it. But that's the reason that we're in the situation we're in, because people don't talk about it and don't say the truth. But I used a couple of examples in America where white people actually did peacefully protest. And the same result over and over again. The siege at Ruby Ridge, where Randy Weaver and his family lived on a remote mountaintop. He was entrapped by the FBI to sell them a shotgun, a simple shotgun. They were surveilling his home on this remote mountaintop in the middle of the night. And him and his 14-year-old son went out. Their dogs were alerted to see, they're on a remote mountaintop. No one
Mm.
comes there. Well, there's some guys hiding in the bushes with weapons. How do you know it's the FBI? You don't. I mean, what would your reaction be? It ended up with his 14-year-old son being shot dead and a federal agent fatally wounded. Then, the townspeople start getting suspicious because tanks are coming in and they're out protesting. Why do you need, blocking the federal government? What do you need the army for one man? And his wife ended up being shot standing in the doorway holding her newborn baby that she had during the siege.
When did
And it
that
ended
happen?
with this happened maybe 20, 25 years ago. I have the link in the video that I just made. I posted it in the description. There's a documentary about it, but Randy Weaver was, in the end, charged with only the firearm. the shotgun. He received a suspended sentence and got probation. 2 federal agents were charged with murder for the death of his wife and his son. And he
Wow.
received a settlement from the government. It's horrifying. Also, Waco, what they did at Waco, they didn't have to do that. You know, a lot of people died that day, whether I agree with David Koresh or whatever. They could have waited for David Koresh to come out and go to town. That's all they had to do. No, instead they tried to breach the compound, open fire, and a ton of people died in a fiery hell, many of which were children, because of the arrogance and the abuse of power by the FBI. You know, and another one I cited was the Oregon ranchers. You know, one of them murdered in cold blood on his way to meet the sheriff by the federal government. They opened fire on the vehicle. That documentary is in the description as well. Trump pardoned the remaining ranchers that were in federal prison. And it was all over grazing rights with the federal government. And these weren't criminals, but if you listen to the news media, you would have thought they were terrorist white supremacists who had hostages. They occupied a abandoned life wild preserve, and they recorded everything. You know, it's just it's terrible the difference of when people are actually being terrorist and in trying to use their rights that we have laid out very perfectly in our Constitution, you know? And, you know, they talk about white privilege, white privilege, white privilege, which to me, I don't use that term. It's a leftist bullshit made up term to try to discredit anything that white people say and say that your opinion doesn't matter because of this bullshit made up leftist term. When all I see is uh, privilege for people of color. You know, it's not privilege for me for you to be given 250 extra points on the SATs to get into college. You know, it's not privilege for Asians to have 50 points taken from them on the SATs. It's not privilege for me for you to get into colleges that you're not qualified to get into because of the color of your skin. You know, everything should be based on um, merit, not color. And we're going on a very dangerous path and wrong path in the entire world. South Africa is a perfect example of what happens when you base everything on color and not on merit. You know, diversity of skin color is not what we need to focus on. Diversity of thought is what's important.
No, that's a very good point. And, with these Black Lives Matter people and the mainstream media, they seem to want to stamp out any form of dissent from their views. They don't tolerate any other views besides the leftist or the liberal one. And, and we've also seen a lot of people being censored on social media. Lots of people were taken off social media. Well, what's your opinion about that?
Right, because Facebook, Twitter, they're all just platforms for terrorists and leftist propaganda. Um, Actually, I will tell you that there's a woman in Houston. I was put in touch with her by Dr. Stanton because I was targeted by sex traffickers on Facebook. Um, I wasn't actually sex trafficked, but I did speak to her office, and she's suing Facebook for allowing this to continue in on behalf of women that actually have been kidnapped and sex trafficked. Um, Dr. Stanton himself, I believe, is going after Facebook as well for inciting genocide in Myanmar and other places because they allow this hate speech to just, run rampant as long as um, it's not a conservative. You know, we can't even repost things that hate speech, that Facebook have deemed to be not hate speech against whites. For example, a simple term, kill all white people. So when reported to Facebook as hate speech, their response was, this does not qualify as hate speech. I once reposted their response. Guess what? I got suspended for 30 days for hate speech. When the person who said it wasn't hate speech. So they're all just part of this left-wing propaganda, um, and they're fueling the fire.
Yes, exactly. And over the last few days, we've seen terrible incidents in Europe as well, especially in France. There was a young girl who was deliberately run over by some Arabs, and she was dragged something like 800 meters uh, by their vehicle, and she was killed. Um, and now, the mainstream media are presenting this as somehow just a little accident, but there was real hatred behind an act like that. The guy ran her over deliberately, and she was completely innocent. And yeah, and well, what are we to make of this? Where people just get
is
attacked
is this the same
like
girl
that?
that they were posting the most disgusting things on her Facebook page that was killed? um, Black Lives Matter, and there was a young girl killed, a mother, and they went to her Facebook page and they were just celebrating her death. It was so just sick.
Yeah, the whole world seems to have entered this pathology around racial issues, and we were trying to be rational and simply report or point out what's going on. We get bad mouthed and censored and so on, whereas these extremists who are actually pouring fuel on the fire, and they're really preaching hatred and violence. They seem to get away with it, and they even get funding from these huge global corporations like Apple and Google and so on.
I just have one question for people that believe this ridiculous propaganda in South Africa and America. If Black Lives Matter really cared about Black lives, how many Black lives are taken in South Africa every year to violence by other Black people? 500,000 people have been murdered under ANC rule, approximately.
Yes, you're
And the
quite right.
majority of those people, the majority of those people are Black.
Mm.
Why are they not marching against the ANC? Why are they not marching against the South African police for only 8% of these crimes ever being prosecuted? In America, why is Black Lives Matter not marching for 3-year-old little girl who was killed in Chicago sitting at the table doing her homework by a stray bullet in a gang drive-by? Why are they not marching for Black police officers that are being murdered? It's because they don't really care about Black lives. It's they have a greater agenda. They're lying to you. They are leading you to believe things that are untrue. Because if they really cared about Black lives, they would care about all Black lives, and they don't.
Yes, and and now people are saying that even when you allege that all lives matter, then that's not acceptable because you are somehow,
Mm-mm.
that it's apparently seen as a racist statement as well.
Yeah.
And I think one of these cricket players in South Africa, Faf du Plessis, he said that uh, no lives matter until Black Lives Matter, something to that effect. Now, well, what an absurd thing to say.
I don't know if you guys have been flooded with the commercials on television like we have
Well, I don't
about
really
Black Lives
watch
Matter.
television, so I wouldn't know. But yes, well,
I don't
what do you?
either.
Yeah.
I happened to have it on the news the other day, and my daughter was 8. She walked by at about the time one of these Black Lives Matter commercials came on. And, I spoke about this on video, but she asked me, it broke my heart really because she asked me, do Black Lives Matter more than mine? And I told her, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You don't owe anyone anything. Your life matters just as much as anybody else's. And they should be ashamed for putting up commercials like that, making children think that their lives are less important than other people, because they're not. And it's just, I'm not using the word racist anymore because, Dan, that's their word.
Sure.
They
No, I
created
agree
that
with you.
word
Yes.
to discredit whites and to tell us that our opinion doesn't matter, our lives don't matter, our children don't matter, and nothing matters if it comes from us. So I'm not going to use their word anymore. I'm going to call them what they are, which is anti-white hate groups and peddling propaganda and lies. That's what it is. The numbers and statistics do not match what they say.
Yeah.
It's all a big lie pushed. And I know it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's true. Look at you can find the data yourself. Go look at the Department of Justice statistics on murder and violent crime. They're not racist. We don't say that the criminal justice system is racist because there are more men in prison than women. Why are there more men? They just happen to commit more crime, right?
Mm, exactly. Very
Well,
good
we have a
point.
problem
Yes.
in America. 13% of the population commit more than 53% of the murder. And it's not whites.
Yeah, they even wrote that
So,
in a leading article in the main Sunday newspaper in Afrikaans, the Rapport. They mentioned that
yeah,
statistic, and it was the first time that I know of that since 1994, where anyone except me and a few other dissidents had dared to mention something like that. And so even they had to admit it, that you know black people in America commit more crime proportionally than whites, which was kind of a
that's
major
how you know it's
moment
getting bad.
in South Africa, just to admit that. Yeah,
That's
so
how you
that's
know it's really bad when they're forced to admit it because they've denied it for so long and they don't want to admit it. But there can never be change if people are not held accountable. And I believe like the future for South Africa and even America, people like Unathi, um, more people like her need to come forward and speak out and make an effort to reach the next generation to turn around this groupthink, this poisoning of the minds of all of the youth, not just Black youth, all of the youth. Let them be individuals. You do a great disservice to them by teaching them that there is some nameless, faceless entity out to get them and that they can never accomplish anything because of
the white privilege,
this
or
this
yeah.
this mythic unicorn called white privilege, right?
Yes.
And you keep them from reaching their full potential. They could do much more um, if if you put their feet to the fire. Children don't um, perform well in school if you just give them the grades and give them this and give them that. You have to challenge them, and that is what makes them grow up to be intelligent, successful, leaders, not making excuses and for bad behavior and just letting them run rampant. Children don't make good decisions, period. It's why they have parents. It's our job to steer them in the right direction. It's why they don't vote. My daughter voted for Hillary Clinton in the school election in kindergarten because she liked her lipstick. So
Yes.
as parents, we have to steer them in the right direction, and just making them a constant victim. I mean, sure, we have to acknowledge past injustices that are legitimate. Absolutely. To move forward, we do have to acknowledge that. But just to keep on beating a dead horse, I mean, it's not useful. It's not. What does it do for society? Look at South Africa. You've now been downgraded to junk status. That is heartbreaking, truly, for me.
Yeah, it's just going downhill all the time. The economy is, yeah, I mean, it's shrinking by about 10 or 13% this year, and they're spending more and more money on useless things and
What
getting
is
us
the
more and
rand
more
at
into.
now?
Well, it's now about 16 rand 35 to the dollar. Well, but it was at above 17 even. So
The last time I checked, it was 21, but that was right when it was downgraded. You guys were
yes,
downgraded.
yes, yeah. There was a
So I
point
guess it,
where I know against the euro it went up to about almost 21, and the dollar, yeah, was not far
it's
behind.
still very sad. I mean,
It is.
most people, especially Americans, don't know that, in the 70s, in the late 70s, I believe like 1979, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a time when the rand was almost double the American dollar. It was like
Exactly. Yes, you're right.
1.76. I mean, that's amazing.
It
That's
is.
pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
exactly.
So
No,
to
you're
have
right.
gone,
And you can only ascribe that to the ANC and their regime, and of course, their terrorism in the run up to the takeover, which also, you know, impacted the country very negatively, and their propaganda with the
sorry,
Swedish money. Yeah,
I
well, but
wish,
I think on that note,
sorry.
maybe I think it's been a very interesting conversation to hear from you, and also some of the incidents that have happened in the US.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. If anyone wants to check out those documentaries that I spoke of, um, I posted the links in my last video.
Okay,
Um,
okay. I'll also in the description of this video, post your video and some of those documentaries, and then they can go and
Thank
watch the
you.
rest of it.
I
Okay.
appreciate that.
Yeah, and to our viewers, please don't forget to subscribe, and we have to have many more interesting interviews and comments on this channel. Until next time, goodbye.